Dr. Marcus Reed stood in the empty operating room at 3:47 a.m., staring at the blood still pooling on the floor where 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez had been fighting for her life 20 minutes earlier. The hospital administration had just escorted him out of surgery and suspended him pending investigation for gross violation of hospital protocols and endangering patient safety. In his 38 years, 12 of them as an Army medic in Afghanistan and 6 as a civilian emergency physician, Marcus had never lost a child on his table, and he wasn't about to start tonight. The girl had been brought in after a car accident, her abdomen distended and her blood pressure dropping fast. Internal bleeding, probably splenic rupture, maybe liver damage. The attending surgeon was in another emergency. The on-call pediatric surgeon was 40 minutes away, and Emma Rodriguez was going to die in 15 minutes if someone didn't operate immediately. Marcus had made the call that would end his career. Now he sat in the hospital administrator's office, still wearing blood-stained scrubs, while Janet Morrison read him the formal charges. Performing surgery outside his specialty certification, operating without proper authorization, violating hospital chain of command protocols. Dr. Reed, your military experience doesn't give you the right to ignore civilian medical protocols, Morrison said, her voice cold with bureaucratic authority. We have procedures for a reason. Emma Rodriguez is alive because I ignored your procedures. That's yet to be determined. The family is considering a malpractice lawsuit, and the state medical board will be conducting their own investigation. Marcus looked out the window at the parking lot, where ambulances continued bringing in patients who needed help, regardless of what forms had been filled out or which doctor was officially authorized to treat them. I took an oath to do no harm. Letting a child die while waiting for paperwork isn't harm. Dr. Reed, you're suspended without pay pending the investigation. Security will escort you out. The Rodriguez family lived in a modest duplex on the east side of town, where Maria Rodriguez worked 2 jobs to support her 3 children, and her husband drove delivery trucks when his back allowed it. Marcus sat in his car across the street for 20 minutes before working up the courage to knock on their door. Maria opened it, wearing the exhausted expression of a mother who'd spent the night in a hospital waiting room, not knowing if her daughter would live or die. Dr. Reed, what are you doing here? Mrs. Rodriguez, I wanted to check on Emma. See how she's recovering. She's doing well. The doctors say she'll make a full recovery. Marcus noticed she didn't invite him in, didn't meet his eyes directly. Something was wrong. Mrs. Rodriguez, is there something you'd like to ask me? About the surgery, about what happened? Maria looked back into the house, then stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind her. Dr. Reed, the hospital lawyers came to see us yesterday. They said you operated on Emma without permission, that you could have killed her. And what do you think? I think my daughter is alive, and she wasn't going to be if we'd waited. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But they're saying we should sue you, for our own protection. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. They're pressuring you to file a lawsuit? They're saying if we don't, we won't have any legal recourse if complications develop, that you practicing outside your specialty puts Emma at risk for future problems. Mrs. Rodriguez, I've performed that surgery dozens of times in field hospitals. I saved Emma's life. I know, and I'm grateful. But they're lawyers, Dr. Reed. They know how to make people scared. The medical review board hearing was held in a sterile conference room that smelled like disinfectant and broken careers. Dr. Patricia Simmons, the hospital's chief of surgery, sat at the head of the table with 4 other physicians Marcus had worked alongside for 3 years. but who now looked at him like he was a stranger. "Dr. Reed," Dr. Simmons began, reading from a prepared statement. "You stand accused of performing a surgical procedure outside your certified specialty area, operating without proper authorization, and endangering patient safety through reckless disregard for established protocols." Marcus's attorney, a tired-looking man named David Kim, who specialized in medical malpractice defense, had advised him to say as little as possible and let the hospital's own investigation reveal the facts. "Dr. Reed, please explain your actions on the night of September 15th. 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez presented with internal bleeding from a motor vehicle accident. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly. The attending surgeon was unavailable. The on-call pediatric surgeon was 40 minutes away, and the patient would have died without immediate intervention. And you made the decision to operate yourself?" "I made the decision to save a child's life." Dr. James Morrison, the hospital's medical director and Janet Morrison's husband, leaned forward. "Dr. Reed, are you certified to perform pediatric abdominal surgery?" "No." "Are you trained in civilian surgical protocols?" "I'm trained in trauma surgery. I performed similar procedures regularly during my deployment in Afghanistan." "But not in a civilian hospital setting, with civilian oversight and accountability." Marcus looked around the table at colleagues who'd praised his work, recommended him for promotions, invited him to their homes for dinner. Now they sat in judgment, protecting the institution that employed them all. Dr. Morrison, with respect, a bleeding spleen doesn't care whether it's in Kandahar or Kansas City. Surgery is surgery. Dr. Reed, your military experience, while admirable, doesn't qualify you to make life and death decisions outside your certified specialty. The first surprise came from Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric surgeon who'd been brought in to review Emma Rodriguez's case. Her report, submitted 3 days after the hearing, was not what the hospital administration had expected. The surgical technique employed by Dr. Reed was textbook perfect. Chen wrote in her official evaluation, "The patient's spleen was successfully repaired using advanced trauma surgery methods that are considered cutting-edge in military medicine, but are not yet standard practice in civilian hospitals." She continued, "Had the patient waited for the on-call pediatric surgeon to arrive, she would have suffered irreversible organ failure and likely death. Dr. Reed's intervention was not only appropriate, but life-saving." The report landed on Janet Morrison's desk like a bomb. Chen was one of the most respected pediatric surgeons in the region, and her evaluation directly contradicted the hospital's position that Marcus had endangered Emma's life. The second surprise came from the Rodriguez family's new attorney, a former military lawyer named Lieutenant Colonel Angela Torres, who'd taken their case pro bono after hearing about the hospital's pressure campaign. "My clients are not suing Dr. Reed," Torres announced at a press conference outside the courthouse. "They're suing Memorial Hospital for attempting to coerce a family into filing a frivolous lawsuit against the doctor who saved their daughter's life." Torres had uncovered something that Marcus hadn't known. The attending surgeon, who was supposed to be available that night, had been drinking at a medical conference and was in no condition to operate on anyone. The hospital had covered up his absence and blamed Marcus for unauthorized surgery rather than admit their own failures. The third surprise came from Dr. Michael Santos, a trauma surgeon who'd served with Marcus in Afghanistan and now worked at a hospital in Denver. Santos had driven 6 hours to testify at Marcus's disciplinary hearing, bringing with him something that changed everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've reviewed the case files, surgical reports, and patient outcomes for Dr. Reed's intervention," Santos told the review board. "What I found was the kind of surgical excellence that saved hundreds of lives in combat zones." He placed a thick folder on the table. I also found something else. This hospital has a pattern of covering up medical errors by blaming physicians who dare to act outside established protocols. The folder contained documentation of 4 other cases where Marcus had been blamed for complications that were actually caused by systemic failures in the hospital's emergency response procedures. Dr. Reed didn't violate protocols. Santos continued. He exposed the fact that your protocols are designed to protect the hospital from liability, not to save patients' lives. Dr. Simmons looked uncomfortable. Dr. Santos, these are serious allegations. Yes, they are. Which is why I've shared copies of this documentation with the State Medical Board, the Joint Commission, and the local media. The 4th surprise came 24 hours later, when the story broke on the evening news. An investigative reporter named Jessica Martinez had been digging into Memorial Hospital's practices for months, and Marcus's case had given her the angle she needed. Tonight at 11, Martinez announced on the 6 o'clock teaser, how one hospital's cover-up nearly cost a war hero his career and a little girl her life. The story revealed that Memorial Hospital had settled over $2 million in malpractice claims over the past 5 years, all involving cases where emergency protocols had delayed critical care. Marcus's case was just the latest example of administrators sacrificing patient care to protect themselves from liability. The Medical Review Board reconvened the following Monday in the same sterile conference room, but the atmosphere was completely different. Dr. Simmons looked haggard, Dr. Morrison avoided eye contact, and the other board members shuffled through papers with the uncomfortable expressions of people who knew they were on the wrong side of the story. Dr. Reed, Dr. Simmons began. In light of new evidence presented to this board, we are prepared to offer you full reinstatement with back pay and a formal apology. Marcus's attorney leaned over and whispered something about accepting the offer and moving on. But Marcus wasn't finished. Dr. Simmons, what about the systemic problems that created this situation? What about the attending surgeon who was too drunk to operate? What about the protocols that prioritize paperwork over patient care? Dr. Reed, those are administrative matters that will be addressed separately. Will they? Or will you wait until another doctor has to choose between following protocols and saving a life? The room was quiet for a long moment. Dr. Morrison finally spoke. Dr. Reed, what would you have us do? I'd have you remember why you became doctors in the first place, to help people. Everything else is just paperwork. Marcus stood up to leave, but Dr. Simmons called his name. Dr. Reed, there's one more thing. The hospital board has approved the creation of a new position. Director of Emergency Trauma Protocols. It comes with a significant salary increase and the authority to revise emergency procedures based on best practices from military medicine. Marcus looked around the room at the faces of his colleagues, people who'd been willing to destroy his career to protect their own comfort. I'll consider it, he said. But first, I want to see Emma Rodriguez. Emma was sitting up in her hospital bed, coloring in a book while her mother read a magazine nearby. The 8-year-old looked up when Marcus knocked on the door frame. Are you the doctor who fixed my tummy? She asked. I helped, Marcus said, sitting in the chair beside her bed. Mama says you got in trouble for helping me. Marcus glanced at Maria Rodriguez, who nodded encouragingly. Sometimes adults have rules that don't make sense, Marcus said. But the important thing is that you're feeling better. I am. And I drew you a picture. Emma handed him a crayon drawing of a man in scrubs standing next to a little girl. Above them, she'd written "Thank you" in careful block letters. Marcus felt his throat tighten. This is beautiful, Emma. Can I keep it? Yes. And Dr. Reed? What's that, sweetheart? My mama says you were a soldier before you were a doctor. That's right. Did you help people when you were a soldier too? I tried to. Good. That's what soldiers are supposed to do. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the same operating room where his career had nearly ended, training a group of emergency physicians in trauma surgery techniques he'd learned in Afghanistan. The new protocols he'd developed had reduced emergency surgery wait times by 40% and had already saved lives. Dr. Sarah Chen observed from the gallery, taking notes for a medical journal article about integrating military medicine practices into civilian hospitals. The story of Marcus's suspension and reinstatement had become a case study in medical schools across the country. Dr. Reed, one of the residents, asked during a break, "Do you ever regret speaking up, even when it nearly cost you everything?" Marcus thought about Emma Rodriguez, about the other patients whose lives depended on doctors willing to act when action was needed rather than when forms were filed. "No," he said. "Some things are worth the risk." The hospital's lawyer had settled the Rodriguez family's lawsuit against Memorial Hospital for an undisclosed sum. Dr. Morrison had been quietly transferred to an administrative position. The attending surgeon who'd been too drunk to operate had resigned and entered rehabilitation. But Marcus's real vindication came from the other military medics who'd reached out after hearing his story. Dr. Santos had been right. There were dozens of veteran physicians working in civilian hospitals, struggling to adapt military medicine's life-saving urgency to bureaucratic systems that prioritized protocol over patients. They'd formed an informal network, sharing techniques and supporting each other when they faced the inevitable conflicts between doing what was right and doing what was expected. "Dr. Reed," the hospital administrator called from the gallery. "There's someone here to see you." Marcus looked up to see Emma Rodriguez and her mother standing in the doorway. Emma was carrying a new drawing, this one showing doctors and soldiers working together. "We wanted to thank you again," Maria said, "and to tell you that Emma wants to be a doctor when she grows up. A doctor who helps people, just like you." Marcus knelt down to Emma's level and accepted her newest artwork. "That's wonderful, Emma. The world always needs more doctors who remember why they wanted to help people in the first place." As he watched them leave, Marcus reflected on the strange path that had brought him from treating wounded soldiers in Afghanistan to fighting bureaucracy in a civilian hospital. Different wars, different enemies, but the same fundamental mission: to heal people when they needed it most, regardless of the cost. 6 months later, Emma Rodriguez returned to school with a faint scar on her abdomen and a story about the doctor who'd saved her life by breaking the rules when the rules were wrong.